Today we're making my 2-day pizza dough. This dough is fermented in the fridge over 48 hours for extra flavour, better oven spring and proper blistering. It's super easy to handle, won't tear when you stretch it and makes the best crusts. Now for the best results you want to cook your pizza in a pizza oven, but this recipe will work inside in a regular oven as well. We'll be going through how to stretch, top and bake this dough in this video as well. Anyway, let's get started. So first we're going to add 675 grams of OO flour into the bowl of a stand mixer. Then I've got 410 grams of room temperature water. I'm going to add most of it into the bowl. We need to save around 30 grams of the water and we'll be using this to dissolve the yeast later on. Next we're going to mix with the dough hook on a low speed until the flour and water is just combined. And we're going to leave the flour and water to auto-lease for an hour at room temperature. We're not looking to make a proper dough here, so a few streaks of flour is fine. The reason behind doing this is to hydrate the flour, which helps with gluten development. Now I found that an hour works best, but if you're short on time, 30 minutes will do the trick as well. So you might need to finish mixing the dough by hand, but once it's mixed it should look something like this. Then we're going to cover the bowl with a tea towel and let it sit at room temperature for an hour. Next we're going to take 0.7 grams of dried active yeast and dissolve it in the remaining water. As this is such a small amount of yeast, you need a set of micro scales to weigh it out. Now we're going to add the yeast and water into the dough, then mix on a medium-low speed until it's been incorporated. This will only take a couple of minutes. Once the dough's come together, we're going to gradually add in 20 grams of fine sea salt. I use molten sea salt, but most brands will work. Once all the salt's been added, we're going to continue mixing the dough on a medium-low speed until it's smooth and coming away from the sides of the bowl. This will take between 5 and 10 minutes. Whilst that's happening, we're going to lightly oil a glass bowl. We'll be using this to proof the dough in so we can keep an eye on how it's fermenting. So now that we've got a smooth dough, we're going to transfer it into the lightly oiled bowl. Then we're going to cover the bowl with a tea towel and let the dough bulk ferment at room temperature for 2.5 to 3 hours. During the first hour, we're going to perform 2 sets of coil folds spaced 30 minutes apart. This just helps with gluten development. So to perform a set of coil folds, we're going to use wet hands to gently loosen the dough from the sides of the bowl. Then we're going to use both hands to gently lift the dough from the middle until one side is released from the bowl. We're going to fold the released side back under the dough, then turn the bowl 180 degrees and repeat. Then you turn the bowl 90 degrees, repeat, and then turn the bowl another 180 degrees and repeat for one last time. So after the first hour, we're going to leave the dough untouched for the remaining 1.5 to 2 hours of the bulk ferment. You know when your dough's finished its bulk ferment because it will have risen in size by about 50% and you'll see lots of tiny bubbles around the edges. These bubbles are signs of fermentation. So next we're going to transfer the dough to a work surface, then use a bench scraper to divide it into 4 equal pieces. Each piece should weigh around 275 grams. The dough shouldn't be sticky, so you won't need any extra flour on your work surface. So now that we've got 4 equally sized pieces of dough, we're going to shape each one into a ball. The way that I like to do this is to bring all the edges into the middle, then flip the dough over and use cupped hands to shape it into a ball. So next I've got 4 individual containers which I've lightly greased with oil, and then I'm going to add a ball of dough into each one. You can use a dough tray if you'd prefer, but I like to do it this way. So I'm going to cover each container with a lid, then place the dough in the fridge and let it ferment for between 36 and 48 hours. After 2 days, the balls of dough will have risen in size slightly, and there'll be lots of tiny bubbles around the edges and underneath. So before we can use our dough for pizzas, we need to let it sit at room temperature for 3 to 4 hours. You know when the dough is ready to use because it will have risen slightly and will no longer feel cold to the touch. So about an hour before the dough is ready, we need to preheat a pizza oven. I find that this dough cooks best at a temperature between 400 and 450 degrees Celsius, or 750 degrees to 840 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also best to let the stone saturate with heat for a good 20 minutes once the oven's up to temperature. So now our dough is ready to use. You can see that it's risen in size and it will no longer feel cold. So now it's time to make some pizza. First, I'm going to dust a work surface with some fine semolina, and I'm going to tip the dough out on top. You want to carefully tip the dough out onto the semolina and then flip it over so it's facing the same way up as before. Then we're going to use our fingertips to press the dough into a disc, starting from the centre and working our way towards the edge. This pushes the air to the outside, forming the crust. I tend to leave a 1 to 2 centimetre border around the outside. Then we're going to pick the dough up and rotate it in our hands, letting gravity stretch it out. This is called the steering wheel method of stretching. Before we put the dough back down, we need to get rid of any excess semolina as it will burn in the oven. The dough's not at full size yet, but we'll stretch it out to 12 inches once we've added the toppings. Speaking of toppings, I'm using tomato sauce, fresh basil, parmesan, fior di latte mozzarella and pepperoni. Plus a drizzle of hot honey, but that goes onto the pizza once it's cooked. Obviously you can top your pizza with whatever you like. Next, we're going to transfer the dough to the peel, then stretch it out by hand to 12 inches. Then we just need to redistribute the toppings evenly across the pizza. Then I'm just going to gently shake off any excess semolina, and then the pizza can go into the oven. So I'm cooking on my Gosney Arc XL, and I've got the flame set to around medium. So after about 30 seconds, the crust will start to puff up, so I'm going to take it out of the oven and turn it at 180 degrees. I find that it's easier to use the larger peel for the first turn, and then swap over to the turning peel for the rest of them. So now we're just going to continue cooking the pizza, turning it frequently, until the crust has risen, is a deep golden brown, and the base is cooked through. In total, the cooking process will only take between 1 and 1.5 minutes. All that this pizza needs is a drizzle of hot honey. That's how to make my 2-day pizza dough. The full recipe and loads more can be found on my blog saltbuttersmoke.com. There's more pizza oven recipes on my channel as well. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week for another recipe.